The Blackwood family mansion stood like a monument to old money against the December snow, its Georgian columns wrapped in garlands of fresh pine and twinkling lights that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Inside, the great room buzzed with the forced merriment of a family Christmas gathering, where appearances mattered more than genuine affection and every conversation carried an undercurrent of competition disguised as holiday cheer. 23 relatives had gathered for what everyone assumed would be Grandma Rose's final Christmas, though nobody spoke about it directly. At 94, she had been declining steadily since her stroke 6 months earlier, and her lawyer's presence at today's festivities had everyone on edge, though they hid their anxiety behind champagne toasts and elaborate gift exchanges. I sat in the corner armchair that had become my traditional spot over the years, close enough to participate if required, far enough away to avoid most of the family politics that dominated these gatherings. My simple wool sweater and department store slacks stood in stark contrast to the designer holiday wear displayed by my cousins, who treated Christmas dinner like a fashion show with a captive audience of potential critics. "The prime rib is absolutely divine this year," Aunt Patricia announced from her position near the marble fireplace, where she held court in her new Chanel suit. "We had it flown in from that ranch in Colorado, the same one that supplies the governor's mansion. Nothing but the finest for Mother's Christmas." Uncle Mike nodded approvingly while adjusting his custom cufflinks, which featured tiny diamonds that caught the light from the crystal chandelier above. "Rose deserves the best," he agreed, though his eyes kept drifting toward the study where Grandma Rose's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had been setting up documents for the past hour. "She's been the heart of this family for so long." The irony wasn't lost on me. For the past 5 years, since Grandma's health had started declining, family visits had become increasingly strategic. Cousins who had barely spoken to her before suddenly began making weekly trips to the mansion, bringing flowers and homemade cookies, sharing elaborate stories about their children's achievements and their own professional successes. "Jessica's been accepted to Harvard Medical School," my cousin Amanda announced to the room, beaming with parental pride as she adjusted her strand of genuine pearls. "Full scholarship, of course." The admissions committee said they'd never seen such impressive research for an undergraduate student. "Wonderful news," Uncle Robert chimed in from across the room, where he stood warming his hands by the fire. "Our family has always valued education and achievement. Rose would be so proud to know the next generation is continuing the tradition of excellence." The emphasis on "our family" wasn't subtle. Over the years, these gatherings had developed an unspoken hierarchy based on professional success, financial stability, and social status. Medical degrees, law partnerships, and corporate executive positions earned you prime seating at dinner and the lion's share of conversation time. Less prestigious careers relegated you to the periphery, both literally and figuratively. "Where's little Emma today?" Aunt Patricia asked, scanning the room with the practiced eye of someone maintaining a mental guest list. "I thought she'd be here for Christmas." "Emma's spending the holidays with her mother's family this year," I replied quietly from my corner chair. "The custody arrangement rotates annually." The explanation seemed to satisfy her curiosity, though I caught the subtle exchange of glances between several relatives. My divorce 3 years ago had further complicated my already tenuous position in the family hierarchy. Single motherhood, even shared custody, was viewed as another mark against my overall family value assessment. "That's a shame," Uncle Mike said with the kind of perfunctory sympathy wealthy people offer for situations they consider preventable. "Children should be with family during the holidays. Stability is so important for their development." The comment stung because it was delivered with just enough plausible deniability to avoid being called directly insulting. Mike's own children had attended boarding schools from age 12. Seeing their parents perhaps 6 weeks total each year, but apparently that counted as stability in ways my arrangement didn't. Speaking of stability, my cousin Bradley interjected from his position near the piano, where he'd been showing off his new Rolex to anyone who would admire it. "I just closed the Henderson Industries deal. Biggest acquisition in our firm's history. The partners are talking about fast-tracking me to senior associate." Approving murmurs rippled through the room like applause at a concert. Bradley's law career had been meteoric, aided by family connections and an Ivy League education that opened doors before he even had to knock. His success reflected well on the family's overall status, making him a favorite topic of conversation at gatherings like this. Rose always said you had the makings of a brilliant attorney, Aunt Margaret added with obvious pride. Even as a child you could argue your way out of any trouble. Natural talent combined with excellent education, that's the Blackwood way. I sipped my wine, a modest Pinot Noir I'd brought from the grocery store, and listened to the familiar rhythm of family celebration. Achievements were announced, praised, and used as evidence of the family's continued prosperity and influence. My own career as a freelance graphic designer was rarely mentioned, partly because it didn't fit the narrative of professional success the family preferred to maintain. "Has anyone heard from Cousin David?" Uncle Robert asked, checking his gold pocket watch with the kind of theatrical gesture that suggested he wanted people to notice the expensive timepiece. "I thought he'd be driving up from the city today. David's been incredibly busy with the mayoral campaign," Aunt Patricia explained with obvious satisfaction. "His consulting firm is handling all the political advertising for Senator Mitchell's re-election bid. Very high-profile work, extremely lucrative. He sends his regrets but simply couldn't get away." The explanation was accepted without question, though I suspected David's absence had more to do with avoiding awkward questions about his recent bankruptcy than with political consulting obligations. But acknowledging family financial failures wasn't part of the Christmas tradition, so his success narrative remained intact. Around 6 o'clock, as the winter light began fading outside the tall windows, Mr. Henderson emerged from the study carrying a thick leather portfolio. His presence had been quietly acknowledged throughout the afternoon, but now he commanded the room's complete attention without saying a word. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in the formal tone of someone accustomed to delivering important information to important people, "Mrs. Blackwood has asked me to read her final will and testament this evening, in the presence of the assembled family." The room fell silent except for the soft crackling of logs in the fireplace. 23 people suddenly became very interested in their wine glasses, their jewelry, anything except making direct eye contact with the lawyer who held the keys to their financial futures. Grandma Rose had been the family's financial anchor for 6 decades, ever since Grandpa James had built his textile empire in the 1960s. The mansion, the vacation properties, the stock portfolio, the various business interests, everything had been consolidated under her management after his death 20 years ago. Conservative estimates put the estate's value somewhere north of $40 million, though the exact figure was known only to Rose and her financial advisors. "Before I begin," Mr. Henderson continued, adjusting his reading glasses with deliberate precision, "I want to note that this will was updated as recently as 6 months ago following Mrs. Blackwood's stroke. She was of completely sound mind and clear intention when these final changes were made." More silence, though I noticed several relatives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. 6 months ago would have been right around the time when family visits had intensified dramatically, when cousins who had been absent for years suddenly began making regular pilgrimages to pay their respects. "The last will and testament of Rose Margaret Blackwood," he began, his voice carrying easily through the large room. "I, Rose Margaret Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby distribute my earthly possessions as follows." My hands were trembling slightly as I set down my wine glass. Despite years of feeling like a second-class family member, despite the constant reminders that my lifestyle and choices didn't measure up to family standards, I had harbored a small hope that Grandma Rose had seen something in me worth recognizing. "To my son Michael Blackwood and his wife Patricia, I leave the sum of $50,000 each, with my gratitude for their years of service on various charitable boards that have brought honor to the family name." $50,000. Uncle Mike's face went through several color changes as he processed the number. He had been expecting significantly more, probably enough to fund his planned retirement to that golf community in Florida he'd been researching online. "To my son Robert Blackwood and his wife Margaret, I leave the sum of $50,000 each, with appreciation for their contributions to the family's social standing and community involvement." Uncle Robert's reaction was similar to his brother's. Shock followed by barely concealed disappointment. $50,000 was substantial money for most people, but for someone who had been expecting a multi-million-dollar inheritance, it felt almost insulting. "To my grandchildren Bradley, Amanda, Jessica, David, Christopher, and Emily, I leave the sum of $25,000 each, to be used for educational purposes or career advancement as they see fit." The cousins were doing rapid mental calculations, trying to figure out how much of the estate had been distributed and how much remained. So far, the total was only $400,000, a fraction of what everyone knew the estate was actually worth. The vacation property in Martha's Vineyard I leave to the local historical society, with the stipulation that it be maintained as a museum showcasing early American textile industry heritage. More shocked expressions. The Martha's Vineyard house was worth at least $3 million, and several relatives had been making plans for shared summer custody arrangements. Giving it to a historical society meant none of them would ever benefit from its value. The art collection, valued at approximately $2.8 million, I leave to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with the request that it be displayed as the James and Rose Blackwood collection. Aunt Patricia actually gasped audibly. The art collection had been her particular area of interest, and she had spent considerable time over the past year cataloging pieces and researching their provenance, presumably in preparation for eventual ownership. My stock portfolio, current value approximately $12.4 million, I leave to various charitable organizations as detailed in Schedule A of this document. $12 million to charity. The number seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room. Uncle Mike had gone completely white, while several cousins looked like they might actually be sick. The family mansion and its contents, valued at approximately $8.7 million, I leave to be sold, with proceeds distributed to educational scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing careers in textile and manufacturing industries. The mansion itself, gone. The furniture, the artwork, the china, the silver, all of it destined for auction houses and charity organizations. This was the home where 3 generations of Blackwoods had gathered for holidays and celebrations, and Grandma Rose had effectively erased it from the family's future. All remaining liquid assets, business interests and miscellaneous holdings, current value approximately $16.3 million, I leave in their entirety to my granddaughter, Elena Martinez. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. 22 relatives turned to stare at me with expressions ranging from shock to horror to pure rage. Elena Martinez, the family member who wasn't really family, according to my aunt's earlier whisper. The divorced single mother who worked as a freelance graphic designer and drove a 10-year-old Honda. The one who brought grocery store wine to Christmas dinner and wore department store clothes to family gatherings. Furthermore, Mr. Henderson continued, apparently unaware of the emotional nuclear bomb he had just detonated, Mrs. Blackwood has included a personal letter to be read aloud to the assembled family. He opened a sealed envelope with Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting on the front and cleared his throat before beginning to read. "My dear family," he began, "if you are hearing this letter, it means I am no longer with you, and you have just learned how I have chosen to distribute the wealth that James and I accumulated over our lifetime together." The room remained frozen, 22 people afraid to move or speak as the voice of their deceased matriarch reached them through Mr. Henderson's careful pronunciation. "I know many of you are shocked by my decisions and I want you to understand the reasoning behind them. For the past 5 years as my health declined, I watched very carefully as family members who had been absent for years suddenly began visiting regularly, bringing gifts and attention that had been notably lacking when I was healthier and presumably less generous. Aunt Patricia's face had gone from pale to bright red, while Uncle Mike was staring at his hands as if they contained answers to questions he didn't want to ask. I observed the sudden interest in my art collection, the casual questions about property values, the strategic conversations about family heritage and legacy. I watched relatives calculate my mortality timeline and adjust their attention accordingly. The letter was describing exactly what everyone had been doing, but hearing it spoken aloud in Grandma Rose's words made the behavior sound calculated and predatory in ways that hadn't been apparent when they were actually doing it. Elena was the only family member who visited me regularly before my stroke, the only one who called simply to chat rather than to assess my mental acuity or fish for information about my financial plans. She brought her daughter Emma to see me not because she hoped to inherit something, but because she thought I might enjoy spending time with my great-granddaughter. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes as I listened to words I had never expected to hear. For years, I had assumed that my modest lifestyle and unconventional choices had disappointed Grandma Rose the same way they disappointed everyone else in the family. Elena never asked me about my will, never hinted that she expected inheritance, never treated me differently as my health declined. She was the same loving granddaughter at 94 that she had been at 90. And that consistency of character is worth more than all the strategic kindness displayed by others combined. Mr. Henderson paused to turn the page, giving the assembled relatives time to process what they were hearing. The woman they had dismissed as not really family had been the only one whose motivations Grandma Rose had trusted completely. To those of you who are angry about my decisions, I want you to understand that you have received exactly what you invested in our relationship. Your $50,000 represents compensation for your years of charitable board service and social events that enhanced the family reputation. But inheritance, real inheritance, goes to people who loved me without expecting anything in return. Uncle Robert was standing very still near the fireplace, his face a mask of controlled rage and humiliation. The strategic visits, the expensive gifts, the carefully planned conversations about family legacy, all of it had been transparent to the woman they thought they were manipulating. Elena, my dear granddaughter, I know this inheritance will change your life dramatically, and I have complete confidence that you will use it wisely. The money comes with only one requirement: that you establish a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing higher education, because I believe second chances and new opportunities should be available to women who are working to build better lives for themselves and their children. The final stipulation was perfectly crafted to emphasize the contrast between my situation and everyone else's. While my cousins had inherited money with no strings attached, my much larger inheritance came with a responsibility to help other women in similar circumstances to my own. To the rest of my family, I leave you with this thought: wealth that is earned through love and loyalty has value beyond its monetary amount. Wealth that is pursued through manipulation and calculation will never bring the satisfaction you expect it to provide. Mr. Henderson folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope. That concludes the reading of Mrs. Blackwood's final will and testament. Elena, I'll need to schedule a meeting with you this week to discuss the practical aspects of managing your inheritance. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. 22 people were staring at me, some with barely controlled fury, others with the kind of shock that comes from realizing you've fundamentally misjudged a situation, and a few with what might have been grudging respect. This is ridiculous, Uncle Mike finally exploded, his controls snapping like a brittle wire. Elena hasn't contributed anything to this family. She's been divorced, she works freelance jobs, she can barely support herself and her daughter. What does she know about managing $40 million? Apparently more than any of us, my cousin Bradley said quietly, his voice hollow with defeat. Grandma Rose saw something in Elena that she didn't see in the rest of us. Aunt Patricia was shaking with rage, her carefully applied holiday makeup unable to hide the fury in her eyes. This is what happens when someone gets too old to make rational decisions. Elena probably manipulated a sick old woman into. Stop, I said firmly, standing up from my corner chair for the first time since the reading began. Don't you dare suggest that I manipulated Grandma Rose. I loved her exactly the same way when she was healthy and wealthy as I did when she was sick and vulnerable. Can any of you say the same? The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. My weekly visits had continued unchanged for 5 years, while theirs had intensified dramatically only after her stroke made her mortality impossible to ignore. Elena, Uncle Robert said, his voice carefully controlled but shaking with suppressed emotion, you have to understand that this inheritance represents our family's legacy. Rose may not have understood the full implications of giving such a large sum to someone who. He paused, clearly struggling to find diplomatic language for his objections. Someone who what? I asked calmly. Someone who isn't successful enough? Someone who doesn't fit your definition of family value? Someone who brought grocery store wine to Christmas dinner instead of champagne. My cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances. Those were exactly the objections they wanted to voice but couldn't articulate without sounding even more petty and materialistic than they already did. This money should stay in the family, Amanda said desperately. It should be shared among all of us, used to maintain the family properties and traditions. Elena, surely you can see that keeping $40 million for yourself isn't fair to everyone else. The irony was breathtaking. The same people who had spent the afternoon celebrating individual achievements and competitive success were suddenly advocating for wealth redistribution now that they weren't the primary beneficiaries. The money is staying in the family, I replied. It's staying with the family member that Grandma Rose trusted most. the family member who loved her without calculating the potential return on investment. Mr. Henderson was packing his documents back into his leather portfolio, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding around him. Elena, shall we say Tuesday morning for our first meeting? There are quite a few financial instruments to review, and we'll need to discuss tax implications and investment strategies. Tuesday morning works perfectly, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Thank you for handling everything so professionally, Mr. Henderson. As the lawyer left through the front door, the remaining relatives stood in awkward clusters throughout the great room, processing what had just happened and what it meant for their individual futures. The Christmas celebration that had begun with champagne toasts and gift exchanges had become a wake for expectations that would never be fulfilled. Elena, my cousin Emily approached me hesitantly. I want you to know that some of us aren't angry about Grandma's decision. I think maybe she saw things more clearly than we realized. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to receive, and I appreciated the gesture even though it came only after the inheritance had been settled beyond their ability to contest. Thank you, Emily, I replied. I know this is difficult for everyone. What will you do? She asked quietly. With all that money, I mean. It's more than most people see in several lifetimes. I looked around the great room where I had spent countless childhood Christmases, feeling both connected to the memories and completely detached from the people who had created them. I'll honor Grandma Rose's wishes, I said. I'll establish the scholarship fund she requested, and I'll use the rest to build a better life for Emma and myself. You're not going to share any of it? Uncle Mike asked, clearly still hoping for some kind of negotiated settlement that would give him access to inheritance money. I'm sharing it exactly as Grandma Rose intended, I replied. With single mothers who are working to improve their circumstances through education. With people who understand that opportunities have to be earned through effort and dedication, not family connections. The subtle dig wasn't lost on anyone in the room. For 20 years, I had watched my relatives leverage family connections for business opportunities, job referrals, and social advancement. Now the family's most substantial financial resource was going to people who had no connections except their own determination to succeed. As I gathered my coat and purse, preparing to leave the mansion that would soon be sold to fund educational scholarships, I felt a strange mixture of grief and liberation. Grandma Rose's death had ended the last genuine relationship I had within this family, but her final gift had also freed me from any obligation to maintain relationships built on judgment and conditional acceptance. Elena, Aunt Patricia called out as I reached the front door, surely we can work something out. Surely we can find a way to honor Rose's memory while also taking care of the entire family. I stopped and turned back to face the room full of relatives who had just learned that their assumptions about family hierarchy and inheritance priority had been completely wrong. Grandma Rose did take care of the entire family, I said quietly. She gave each of you exactly what your relationship with her was worth. The fact that my relationship was worth more than yours isn't something I can fix or negotiate away. As I walked to my car through the December snow, I could see them through the mansion's tall windows, probably beginning the process of determining whether the will could be contested and what legal options might be available to challenge Grandma Rose's decisions. But I wasn't worried about legal challenges because I understood something they didn't. Grandma Rose had been planning this revelation for years, not months. Every strategic visit, every calculated gift, every transparent attempt to curry favor had been carefully observed and evaluated by a woman who had spent 94 years learning to distinguish between genuine love and opportunistic manipulation. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Emma. How was Christmas with the family? Are you coming home soon? I typed back. Christmas was educational. I'm driving home now and I have some very interesting news to share with you. As I pulled out of the mansion's circular driveway for what would probably be the last time, I thought about the scholarship fund I would establish in Grandma Rose's honor. $40 million could provide life-changing educational opportunities for hundreds of women who were working to build better futures for themselves and their children, women who understood that success required effort rather than entitlement. The family that had dismissed me as not really family would spend the rest of their lives knowing that the woman they thought they understood better than anyone had trusted me more than all of them combined. That knowledge, I suspected, would be worth more than any amount of money they might have inherited. My phone rang as I reached the highway and I saw Uncle Mike's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail along with the 3 other calls that followed from various relatives who had apparently decided that private negotiation might be more successful than public confrontation. But there was nothing to negotiate. Grandma Rose had made her decision based on 5 years of careful observation, and her final letter had explained her reasoning with devastating clarity. The inheritance wasn't a windfall to be redistributed according to family politics. It was recognition for the only relationship in her life that had been based on love rather than financial expectation. As I drove through the snowy night toward home, where my daughter was waiting to hear about Christmas dinner with relatives who would never again be able to dismiss either of us as insignificant, I felt the weight of possibility settling around me like a warm coat. $40 million wasn't just money. It was freedom to build the kind of life Grandma Rose had always believed I deserved, even when I hadn't believed it myself.